I had been a park ranger for years, and I thought that I had seen everything that the wilderness had to offer. But one day, I stumbled upon something that left me shaken to my core. I was patrolling a remote section of the park when I noticed a strange formation of stones in the distance. Curious, I decided to investigate. As I got closer, I realized that it was a circle of stones arranged in a perfect circle. I had never seen anything like it before. The stones were old and weathered, and it was clear that they had been there for centuries. As I approached the circle, I felt a strange energy emanating from it. It was as if the stones were alive, pulsing with a mysterious power. Suddenly, I heard a voice behind me. I turned to see a woman standing there, dressed in tattered clothing and holding a staff. She looked at me with intense eyes, and I knew that there was something strange about her. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice dripping with hostility. "I'm a park ranger," I said, trying to sound calm. "I was just investigating this circle of stones." The woman looked at me suspiciously, and for a moment I thought that she was going to attack me. But then she seemed to relax, and she gestured for me to come closer. "This is a site of ancient pagan rituals," she said. "It is sacred ground, and you should not be here." I nodded, feeling a sense of unease. I had heard stories of pagan rituals in the park before, but I had never seen anything like this. The woman continued to speak, her voice becoming more and more intense. As she spoke, I began to feel a strange sensation in my head. It was as if something was trying to take control of my thoughts. I tried to resist, but it was no use. The woman's voice became louder and more insistent, and I felt my willpower slipping away. Suddenly, I heard a voice in my head. It was a woman's voice, soft and gentle, and it seemed to be coming from the circle of stones. "Help me," the voice said. "Please, help me." I tried to ignore it, but the voice became more insistent. "Help me," it said. "Please help me." I knew that I had to do something. I couldn't let this woman and her pagan rituals take control of me. I pulled out my gun and aimed it at the woman. "Back away from the circle," I said, trying to sound firm. But the woman just laughed. "You can't stop us," she said. "We have the power of the ancient ones on our side." I fired a warning shot, hoping that it would scare her off, but she just laughed again, and I realized with horror that she was possessed by something far more powerful than I could ever imagine. Suddenly, there was a blinding flash of light, and the woman was gone. I looked around in confusion, trying to make sense of what had just happened, and then I heard the voice again, the soft and gentle voice that had pleaded for my help. "Thank you," it said. "You have freed me from their grasp." I looked down at the circle of stones and saw a figure emerging from the center. It was a woman, dressed in tattered clothing and covered in dirt. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and spoke again. "I have been trapped here for centuries," she said. "I was a witch, and they used this circle to perform dark rituals on me." I was stunned. I had never believed in witches or pagan rituals before, but now I knew that they were very real. The woman continued to speak, telling me her story. She had been accused of witchcraft by her neighbors, and they had brought her to this circle to perform a ritual to rid her of her supposed powers. But instead of freeing her, the ritual had trapped her soul within the circle, leaving her to suffer for centuries. I listened in horror as she spoke, realizing that I had stumbled upon something far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. And then, something even more shocking happened. The woman began to change, her body twisting and contorting until she was unrecognizable, and then she was gone, replaced by a dark, malevolent spirit. The spirit looked at me with glowing eyes, and I knew that I was in grave danger. But then, something miraculous happened. The voice of the woman returned, speaking in my mind. "You can defeat her," the voice said. "You have the power to banish her from this place." I didn't know what she meant, but I knew that I had to try. I closed my eyes and focused, trying to push the malevolent spirit away with all of my willpower. And then, there was another blinding flash of light. When I opened my eyes, the circle of stones was gone, and the forest was quiet once again. I stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had it all been a hallucination? A trick of my mind? But then, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was the woman, her physical form restored. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "You have freed me from this curse." I nodded, still in shock from what had just happened. As I walked away from the circle, I knew that I would never forget what I had seen. The world was far more mysterious and dangerous than I had ever imagined. From that day on, I patrolled the park with a renewed sense of purpose. I knew that there were forces out there that were beyond my understanding, but I also knew that I had the power to protect the innocent and banish evil from this world. And as I looked out over the trees, I knew that I was not alone. The spirits of the forest were watching over me, guiding me on my journey, and reminding me that there was still much to learn about the world we live in. I had been a park ranger for over 10 years, and I had seen my fair share of strange things in the woods, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened when I got lost. It was a beautiful day, and I had decided to take a hike through a remote section of the park. I had been on the trail for a few hours when I realized that I had made a wrong turn, but I wasn't too worried. I had a compass and a map, and I was confident that I could find my way back to the main trail. But as I walked deeper into the woods, things started to get strange. The trees seemed to be closing in on me, and the air grew thick and oppressive. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, but it only grew stronger. And then I heard it. A faint whisper, like someone speaking just out of earshot. I stopped in my tracks, straining to hear, but there was nothing but the sound of my own breathing. I continued on, but the whispering grew louder. It was as if there were people all around me, speaking in hushed tones, but when I turned to look, there was no one there. The sun was beginning to set, and I realized that I needed to find my way back before it got dark, but the woods seemed to be playing tricks on me. The trail markers were gone, and the trees all looked the same. And then I saw it, a figure standing in the distance, watching me. It was too far away to make out any details, but I could feel its gaze on me. I called out, but there was no answer. The figure just stood there, silent and still. I tried to walk towards it, but it seemed to be moving further away, and then it disappeared altogether. I was beginning to panic. I had never been lost like this before, and the feeling of being watched was becoming unbearable. And then I heard a voice. It was faint at first, but it grew louder with each passing moment. It was a woman's voice, singing an old folk song. I followed the sound, my heart pounding in my chest. It led me deeper into the woods until I came to a clearing, and there, in the center of the clearing, was a circle of stones. The woman's voice was coming from inside the circle. I hesitated for a moment, but then I stepped inside, and that's when the horror began. The woman's voice grew louder, and I realized that it was not a song but a chant. The stones began to glow with an eerie light, and the air grew thick with a foul odor. And then the figures appeared. They were all around me, their faces twisted into grotesque masks. They chanted in unison, and I could feel their breath on my skin. I tried to run, but I was rooted to the spot. The figures closed in on me, their hands reaching out to grab me. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The figures disappeared, and the chanting stopped. I stumbled out of the circle, my mind reeling. I eventually found my way back to the main trail, but I never spoke of what had happened to anyone. It wasn't until years later, when I heard stories of the witches' circle, that I realized what I had stumbled upon. The circle was a site used for ancient pagan rituals, and those who entered it were said to be cursed. And then, the twist. The curse had not ended when I left the circle. It had followed me home, and I was forever haunted by the figures in the woods. I tried to ignore them, but they were always there, lurking in the shadows. They followed me wherever I went, even when I left the park. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but then I started to hear the whispers again. The same whispers I had heard in the woods that day. I tried to tell myself that it was all in my head, that I was just imagining things, but the figures in the woods were too real, too vivid. And then one night they came for me. I was asleep in my bed when I felt a cold breeze on my face. I opened my eyes to see a figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was one of the figures from the woods, its face twisted in a grotesque mask. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure approached me, its hands reaching out to grab me, and that's when I woke up. It was all a dream, or was it? I sat up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest, and then I saw it. A figure standing in the corner of my room, watching me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure approached me, its hands reaching out to grab me, and then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. I sat there in the darkness, my mind reeling. I knew then that I was cursed, that the figures in the woods had followed me home. I tried to find a way to break the curse, but nothing worked. I consulted with experts in the paranormal, but they could offer no help. And then, one night, I heard the whispers again. This time, they were coming from outside my window. I approached the window, my heart in my throat, and there, in the darkness, I saw them. The figures from the woods, their faces twisted in grotesque masks. I tried to run, but they were too fast. They surrounded me, their hands reaching out to grab me. And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they were gone. I knew then that I was doomed, that I would never be able to escape the curse. The figures would always be there, lurking in the shadows, waiting to claim me. And so, I live in fear, haunted by the ghosts of the witch's circle. I know that one day they will come for me again, and this time, there will be no escape. I had been a park ranger for over a decade, and in that time, I had seen some strange things, but nothing had prepared me for what I was about to encounter. It started when we received a report of a missing hiker. A woman in her 30s had gone out on a solo hike and had not returned. I gathered a search party and set out into the woods. We combed the area, calling out her name, but there was no response. As night fell, we set up camp and continued the search in the morning. But when we woke up, we found that something was wrong. Our supplies had been scattered and some of our equipment was missing. We searched the area, but we found no sign of the missing hiker. As we continued our search, we began to notice that the woods were different. The trees were twisted and gnarled, and the air had a foul odor. And then we heard it, a strange guttural growling sound that seemed to come from all around us. We tried to ignore it and pressed on with the search. But then, we saw something that made our blood run cold. In the distance, we could see a figure standing on a hill. It was too far away to make out any details, but we knew it was not human. We approached cautiously, our hearts pounding in our chests. And then, we saw what it was. A creature with skin as black as coal and eyes that glowed like embers. It was taller than any human and had long, gnarled fingers that ended in sharp claws. We tried to run, but it was too fast. It chased us through the woods, its growls getting louder and more menacing. Finally, we managed to lose it and regrouped at our campsite. We tried to radio for help, but our communications were jammed. And then, we saw her, the missing hiker, standing at the edge of the woods, her eyes vacant and her skin ashen. We approached her cautiously, but she didn't respond to our calls, and then she lunged at us, her fingers ending in sharp, pointed claws. We managed to subdue her, but we knew then that something was very wrong. As the night wore on, we saw more and more of the creatures. They seemed to be everywhere, watching us with their glowing eyes and menacing growls. We tried to leave the woods, but we found that we were trapped. The creatures had set up some kind of barrier and we couldn't get through. And then we saw it, a circle of stones, with strange symbols etched into them. It was the same circle that the missing hiker had been looking for. We knew then that we had stumbled upon something ancient and powerful, and that we were not alone in the woods. We tried to leave again, but the creatures were waiting for us. They descended upon us, their sharp claws and gnashing teeth tearing through our flesh. We fought back, but it was no use. The creatures were too strong, too powerful. And then, just when we thought it was all over, we heard a voice that was not human, but something else entirely. It spoke to us in a language that we didn't understand, and then, with a burst of light, the creatures were gone. We stumbled out of the woods, battered and bruised, but alive. We never spoke of what happened in those woods, but we knew that we had encountered something that was beyond our understanding, something that was not of this world.